Greetings, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the next part of our mastering series. This is going to be on mastering limiting. Many of you are familiar with, common uses for limiting, including probably mastering limiting. That's probably the most common. And the track we're going to be featuring today is by an artist, DJ B. And the track is called Powerhouse, if I remember correctly. I'm going to leave a link in the description box to his SoundCloud if you like what you hear. And check him out. I think the track will actually be available for release sometime later in the summertime, I think in August. So if you are into that, check it out. Let's open up the file here. Alright. And you can see right here is our pre-master that we've been given. Basically, it's the exported mixdown. And you can see just by the way this file looks that it's not mastered, just because the waveform is kind of short. There's plenty of headroom. And in case you guys were wondering, and if you're wondering what the size of the wave means, so right down the middle of, hopefully down the middle, otherwise we have DC offset, the middle of the sound wave file here, there's going to be a sound wave. And the closer it is to either the top or the bottom, that basically means it's closer to 0 dB. And also, in case you were wondering, anytime, so when it's in the center here, it's at 0. Anytime it's above, it's positive, and anytime it's below, it's negative. Anytime there's a positive number, your speaker is actually pushing sound out, and anytime there's a negative number, the speaker is supposed to be sucking sound in. And that's why you see, I shouldn't say sucking sound, it's being sucked back to create a sound wave. So you can see that, or you can imagine that with all these little tiny ripples here, your sound, or your speaker is moving back and forth quite quickly. But in case you're wondering what that means, that's what that basically means. Now, so we have our mix, and when I'm doing a master, I want to have a reference track, so I want to be able to hear a different track that the artist likes or that I like, that I want to compare it to, and that's just to kind of act as a kind of quality control, make sure that everything sounds like our end result that we have in our minds. So let me get the reference track here. He wanted me to do a reference from Seven Lions. So let's take a listen first to the original mix. Let me turn everything off here. This is the original mix I was given for mastering. Okay, so we hear that one. Now let's listen to the reference track. And usually by listening to the reference track, I can get a good idea of sort of what the artist had in mind for their track, as far as like the tonal qualities to it. So let's start it up. Wow, okay. So, we have quite a feat here, quite a task. But we can hear in the reference track that's not, the mixdown, the track we just played. Aside from the sort of EQing and the saturation that's been done, we can also hear that there's a lot of loudness coming from limiting. And let's take a look with our Ozone analyzer here. Use EQ. Now let's take a look at the reference. Keep an eye here on the RMS. That's the very important value we're looking at here. So we can see that it was peaking up here around minus 4-ish dB RMS. I think if we listen to the full wave, it probably would have gone maybe a little bit over or a little bit under 4. But we can hear right there it's quite loud. 4 is kind of a standard as far as dance music. Now let's listen to our reference and check out the RMS on that. Okay, so we were peaking here around minus 14 dB RMS. So it's significantly quieter. And I've gone over what RMS means in the past, but it stands for root mean square, and it's essentially the average loudness, the average volume of a track or instrument or whatever. And that's generally how humans perceive sound. It's through RMS, through the average sound. We don't usually hear it in peaks. That's just the way the human ear works. Now, how do we get a high RMS? Well, think of it like this. We can't go over 0 dB. That's, otherwise we'll start clipping. And let's say that the lowest the track is playing at a given time is like around minus 18, and then it just barely touches 0. It doesn't go past 0, but it doesn't, go too much below. And what did we say? It was 18? So if we, made a rough average of the two, we'd come out to about minus 9 dB RMS. Now imagine if we took a limiter with the max at 0 dB, and then just before the limiter, we start to turn the gain up. So there's, it's it's impossible for the signal to pass 0, while at the same time, everything below 0 is starting to get a little bit louder. Just imagine the sound creeping up here. And that's eventually how we arrive at higher RMS levels. So if you see something with like minus 5 dB RMS, that means over a given period of time, the peak is probably going to be somewhere at 0, and the very lowest point is going to be somewhere around like minus 10 at a given time. And then when you take, again, this is very rough estimates I'm giving here, but you take the rough estimate, it would be around minus 5 dB RMS. So limiting basically allows us to get a louder signal coming through. And then let me show you really quick what I did to this master to make it, this mixdown that I've been given, to make it much louder. And I'll give you also a little bit of a taste of the saturation I did on it. So let's take this off. Well, let's leave it on actually. There we go. Now here it is before, just to get another taste. Here's the after. So we were coming to about -3 dB RMS at our max. Now that is a little bit higher than the other song. However, the timbre on the other song was a little bit different. It allowed the song to be a little bit louder, or sound a little bit louder, without actually having a higher RMS. But we're at about -3 RMS, which is, again, about, you know, as hot as we're getting right now with the current dance music. Some are even pushing it a little bit harder than that. Keep in mind too, I've gone over this in the past, at least in the comment section. Ozone 5's monitoring, the RMS monitoring, the way it does the math on the RMS is a little bit different than most other, I should say some other programs, and it'll vary between different programs. Now I know some programs will read that this is around -5 dB RMS, but the way Ozone 5 takes the RMS and averages it, and the time frame it uses to average it, it comes out a little bit differently. However, it will be about the same between the programs. Say, for instance, Waves, they might use like, I don't know, say we're at -3 on here, RMS. Waves might have it at like -5. So you just add or subtract 2 to get the other RMS. That's kind of how that works, in case you were wondering. Now, since we are talking about mastering limiters, I'm going to go a little bit into Ozone 5, and I'll also show you how to do some similar stuff within FL Studio's stock plugins or any other plugins you may have that are limiters. So to begin with, we have, where should we start? Mode. On a lot of different programs, there'll be a couple of different algorithms that are often on there. You can see that there's IRC 1, 2, and 3, and each time you go up, the latency and the CPU required increases. The third algorithm I'm using here preserves the bass a little bit more than the second one, and then I just think the second one sounds a little bit clearer than the first one, a little bit better. But the first one's nice if you're doing a quick master because there's no latency, very little CPU. A hard limiter is basically, well, you could read the description there. It says uses the margin as an absolute guide, which will never be exceeded. And it's basically like the IRCs, but the release isn't quite as smooth or, let's say, intelligent. It doesn't. It's not quite as musical, but it'll prevent anything from clipping, or I should say, hard clipping. Now, soft is kind of like a basic, instead of an infinity to 1 ratio, it'll be more like a 30 to 1 ratio or a 50 to 1 ratio. It's kind of like a harder compressor. I don't use that very often, but you know, it gives you that option. Inter-sample detection, that's on many programs, and it basically will prevent you from clipping when you go from a digital interface like this and you start playing your songs on an analog one. There's samples within, when we're using digital, we use samples to track the sound, and sometimes between the samples there might be a little bit of clipping, and when we go to the analog domain there might be a little bit of clipping there. So this inter-sample detection basically prevents any sort of between sample clippings from happening, and it'll do a little bit extra limiting on the side there. I usually leave it off though myself. The character in Ozone 5 is also in many programs known as the release. and that's kind of what dictates the overall way the limiter behaves. On lower volume material, I tend to have it at a kind of a medium setting, and then when I'm limiting really heavily like I am here, I usually have it at a very low setting. The lower the setting, the faster it reacts and releases. The higher the setting, the longer it takes to release. So that's how that works. Transient recovery sort of attempts to preserve any transients that are limited. And then stereo link, when you have it at 100%, and you'll see this on other programs as well, if you have it at 100%, if something starts to be limited in the right channel, no matter where the level is in the left channel, the limiter will also pull it down some as well. When you have it at 0%, it basically means there won't be any limiting taking place at all unless unless that channel is actually starting to go over 0. So that means if the right channel starts to go over 0 and gets limited, the left channel won't at all. It won't even be touched. I usually leave it at 0 myself. And then many other mastering plugins will have a dithering section. You can see Ozone's here, and that prevents what's known as quantization distortion. I think I've gone over that in a previous tutorial. And then there's also a DC filter. It prevents DC offset. And then margin, that controls the output gain to prevent more intersample, clipping, all that good stuff. So I just have it barely below the top, just barely, and that's to allow for maximum loudness while allowing a little bit of room for dithering here. So that's kind of Ozone 5 in a nutshell. Let me just show you how we can limit also within FL Studio. Let's get our Fruity limiter. So our ceiling is by default set at 0. We can adjust that. We're going to keep it at 0 though. And then this will adjust the input gain. So let's do that. So you can see it actually behaves quite a bit like Ozone 5, Ozone 5's mastering limiter, because it's, let's face it, it's pretty similar to, your limiter. Now, you can also do a little bit of saturation. What that acts as sort of a soft knee towards the top end of the VU. Adds a little bit of color on the top. That's really all it does. But that's how you would do it with Fruity limiter in case you don't have Ozone 5. Now, I know I talk a lot about Ozone 5. It is a really solid plugin. However, if you don't want to pony up the, I don't know, I think it's like $400 now for the $300 for the base version, and then like $1,000 for the version I got. You could always just use your stock plugins. Believe it or not, even though they are stock and they come with your program, they still are really high quality plugins, and there's nothing wrong with the Fruity limiter at all. I use it all the time for like sidechains and stuff. But yeah, that's mastering limiting in a nutshell. The next tutorial I'm going to go over a little bit about what limiters do to your signal. So we're going to kind of continue this theme. But anyways, check out my stuff in the description. Check out this producer here. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.